Good morning and welcome to the fourth edition of COVID-19 Stories Around the Globe, an international solidarity series. This series is being brought to you by WorldDenver and the German American Chamber of Commerce in Colorado. The purpose of this series, as we've been putting it on for the last 6 weeks or so, has been to celebrate and highlight our commonalities around the world as we all deal with COVID-19. We're especially excited today to be joined by audience members from around the country as part of the C/C Amplified Ideas Summit. There are events happening, dozens of events being put on by World Affairs Councils around the country, and we're excited to be a part of that. If you're interested in other events as part of the C/C Amplified series, check out cbycamplified.com. For those of you learning about or hearing about WorldDenver for the first time, WorldDenver is an organization that facilitates international exchange and global engagement. In a normal year, we bring about 600 international visitors to Denver for student and professional exchanges to exchange expertise and ideas from all around the world. Obviously, right now, those exchange programs are all canceled or postponed. And so this series is a way for us to continue to keep up international exchange. And what I'm really excited about this program is it kind of mirrors or mimics what an exchange program looks like, as we have panelists from Brunei, from India, from Switzerland, and from here in Colorado. William, would you like to introduce the chamber and yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, John. My name is William Reed. I am the Executive Director of the German American Chamber of Commerce Colorado chapter. We've been doing these webinars for a little while now in partnership with WorldDenver, and we're really excited to be doing this, and we're very excited about today's in particular, because the German American Chamber is devoted to the improvement of investments and trade relations between Germany and the state of Colorado. So this is particularly fascinating for us today. We are the exclusive representative of the GACC Midwest in the state of Colorado, and we host many events and networking opportunities throughout the year. Obviously, we've moved a lot to the virtual space in recent times, but we're hoping to do some more in person soon. But in the meantime, we're very excited to be a part of the series. Thanks, John.
And this morning's focus is on law, policy, and trade. And I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves. And one of the things that our international panelists all have in common is that they recently came to the US through a WorldDenver exchange program. So if the panelists could start by just introducing yourself and then also the program and the places you visited while you were here in the US, and we can start with Kunal. Kunal, I believe you're on mute.
Hi, I'm Kunal. I'm from our state Jharkhand in India. I have been a part of the IBLP exchange program in 2018. So we visited Chicago, we visited DC, and then to Denver, and then to California, and back to India. I was a state member of the state legislature in Jharkhand in India, which is like a state senator that you have in the US. And I am a part of the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is the largest political organization in the world, the BJP, and led by Mr. Narendra Modi, the Honorable Prime Minister of India. And currently, I am working on several fronts related to COVID-19 crisis, like helping the poor people, like feeding them, creating awareness, helping our corona warriors, helping the people who have lost their homes, lost their livelihoods, and getting the efforts coordinated with the government to help the migrant laborers. So there are several fronts that I'm involved with in relation to managing the crisis of COVID-19 in my state as well as in my country. Thank you.
And Alex, we'll move to you next. And we want to give a special thank you to Alex, who's joining us at midnight in Brunei.
Hi guys. Hi everyone watching. Thank you, John. I'm really excited to be a part of this series. My name is Alex. I'm from Brunei, and I was a part of the Professional Fellows Program exactly a year ago, 2019, for the spring program. And I was selected to go to Denver, Colorado for my attachment with a private law firm called Wingenlander and Heisterkamp. That's a law firm in downtown Denver. And I met a lot of cohorts from all over the world, and I get to travel to Washington, D.C. as well, where the Professional Fellows Congress was held, and I get to network with people from all over the world. And I get to go to Missoula, Montana as well for the orientation. So in Brunei, I am a in-house legal counsel in an international bank. I also support on an ad hoc basis NGO here called La Vida that promotes the welfare and assistance of children and youth that have special needs. Yes, and yeah, that's it for me.
Great, thank you. And Mario in Switzerland.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Well, Canal is from, I guess, the biggest democracy in the world. Ours is one of the smaller ones. I'm from Switzerland. I was part of the International Visitors Leadership Program last summer. The main topic was actually trade. We started in Washington, D.C., then we went to Philadelphia. We spent 5 days actually in Denver. We moved on to Seattle and back to Switzerland. Denver was one of the most beautiful cities and experiences I was able to see in the States. It was kind of the eye-opener that there's actually something happening between the two coasts as well, and that there is some alternatives for San Francisco, for New York, whatever. There are some really nice places there, innovative cities, young people who are thriving, and just beautiful landscape. So for me, that was kind of a great combination of business and leisure to experience there. Well, right now we're in a completely different stage also in Switzerland. We're in partial or almost lockdown. I work for Economy Suisse. That's Switzerland's largest business federation. So right now for us, it's all about how to balance this kind of decision between health policy and economic policy. It's not an easy one, and how can we really bring business back on track as soon as possible, but still also safeguard health issues for people, for workers. So this is something we are dealing with right now. And thanks for having me anyway. It's an honor.
Thank you. And we're especially honored to be joined by State Senator Julie Gonzalez to present the U.S. perspective on legislating during COVID-19. And Senator Gonzalez, if you could also talk about an experience you've had with the International Exchange.
Absolutely. I just want to thank all of you for joining us today and participating and visiting Denver. I'm honored and privileged to be the State Senate representative for North, West, and downtown Denver proper in our Colorado state legislature. And prior to joining the legislature, my work was really focused around that intersection of immigration issues and how that comported with our criminal justice system. And so that's a lot of my background. It drives a lot of the work that I do within the state capitol and the General Assembly. I work on the Judiciary Committee. I'm the chair of the Finance Committee, and I'm also on the Appropriations Committee. And so we're going to be very busy as we return to the General Assembly on May the 18th. But I love the fact that you all have taken time to spend to visit Denver and to learn more about the work that we're doing here locally, but also internationally. My brother and sister-in-law actually hosted international exchange students right here in Denver when they were seniors in high school from China. And so that exchange is what makes Denver great. It's what makes us all stronger. And I'm just honored to be here.
Thank you, Senator. And One of the ways that we like to start things off is to ask the question, what has the last 6 weeks or 2 months been like in your country, for yourselves? When did things start to change? What kinds of measures were taken early on? And how did people in your country respond to those measures? And one other thing I want to do very quickly, for those who are attending, we'd like for you to be a part of the conversation. Also, you can ask questions by clicking on the small question mark icon, and that will submit a question to us. We're also recording this session today, and we'll send it to everyone who's registered, as well as posting it online. So if you get disconnected or have technical problems, we'll send you the recording afterwards. But please ask questions, and we'll start with Kunal. Talk a little bit about India and when things, what has happened over the last 2 months.
Alex mentioned, and so did Mario, that we come from the largest democracy with the largest population. So any challenge that we deal with has a very different parameter, has a very different way of handling it. So when the WHO came up with this declaration that it is indeed a pandemic on the 11th of March, we didn't lose any time, and the very next day our Honorable Prime Minister and our National Health Minister, they organized a meeting and took it up on its head. So what we initially did, which is very essential for anyone to understand how India has dealt with this COVID-19 crisis. So WHO already has an infrastructure in place in our country because of the polio crisis and tuberculosis and all other diseases. So what we essentially did initially, we set up a team of those 1,600 odd experts that WHO has across India for National Polio Healthcare Survey, for tuberculosis, for neglected tropical disease, and for hypertension and health system. So we got all these verticals integrated into our national health infrastructure. And then we started it in a very integrated approach, we're pulling in all resources from all the sectors. So like collection of all the reports and scaling up the surveillance and contact tracing, like capacity building, like laboratory diagnosis, all these aspects which are involved in handling with the crisis like a pandemic. So we instantly got hit the ground running. And alongside that, we also requested all our administrative officials and the states, because India is a huge country, as you know, we have so many states. So we got all of them on board, and we started with this integrated approach. And the best part about India's way of handling it is when the COVID-19 crisis started in our country, we had to import the PPE kits. But now we are in a position not only to export, but also we are the second highest manufacturer now for PPE kits, around 2.5 lakhs of PPE kits we can manufacture every day. Similarly, as you are aware of, many countries needed hydroxychloroquine. So we exported around 85 million units of hydroxychloroquine to so many other countries. And as far as paracetamol is concerned, we exported paracetamol to around 8 countries. So like, apart from taking care of the need that we have internally, we also played the medical diplomacy. People are aware of medical tourism, but India introduced medical diplomacy to the world through this COVID-19 crisis. So we actually utilized it as an opportunity to establish our global credentials, which were not only limited to IT, but also to the health sector.
Thank you, Kunal. And moving from large to small, Alex, talk about Brunei and how the things have been in the last 2 months or 6 weeks in Brunei.
So the whole situation started sometime. One of the advantages about Brunei is that we are not just a small country, but the entire country, we only have less than 500,000, in terms of like total population. So the government really has an advantage of really managing this from the start. They have been really proactive and really generous in terms of offering relief packages to really support individuals, business across sectors, and you know, from the time that we managed to sort of encounter an individual who was contracted with the virus. So there were a few restrictions that the government imposed, and one was to shut schools nationwide, and to activate, encourage all businesses around the country to activate the business continuity plan, which is to encourage employees that are in the non-critical functions to work from home, and for those that are frontliners to do a split team operation. And a lot of non-essential services such as eateries, food beverages, cinemas, gyms are shut. Essential services remain open, the banks, petrol station, supermarkets, groceries. So we are really fortunate in the sense that, you know, we didn't have to go to a point of lockdown. You know, we didn't have to impose travel bans. It was more like a travel restriction. Those that would fly into the country inbound would have to undergo 2 weeks of isolation, for example, in the dedicated center. And those that want to fly out need to get prior permission from the Prime Minister's office. So generally, the population, I feel we're quite assured in the way that the government has handled it and has been on top of the situation. Obviously, you know, for a lot of us individuals, this is sort of a new normal for us. It's been 2 months, and the restrictions hasn't been relaxed just yet. But the government has been constantly coming up with, you know, initiatives to make sure that we maintain social distancing, and you know, the general population is safe, and that we don't go out unless necessary. And you know, they're coming up with, you know, creative ways to encourage individuals and businesses to go digital, you know, with their services and solutions. So it's been really encouraging, you know, experience for us here in Brunei.
Thank you. And Mario, talk a little bit about Switzerland, and specifically what kinds of interventions and work has been done by governments in Switzerland and around Europe on the trade side.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess Europe is kind of special, and Switzerland is once again even more special. We're in the heart of Europe. We're a very small country, about the size of Denver, 8 million people, maybe a little bit bigger than Denver, I guess. And we really depend on international connections. So we, when it all started, we kind of saw it coming from Italy. North part of Italy was heavily affected, still is, and we have around 60,000 workers actually a day that travel from Italy to Switzerland for work. We have a lot of tourists that go in both directions. So towards March, government realized that there was no escape from COVID-19. And early April, they also introduced a partial lockdown where schools, restaurants, non-essential shops, like in many other countries, were closed. Food stores were kept open, but museums, zoos, and everything were closed. Public transport was also reduced a lot. And since then, up to today, we had around 30,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19 and 1,500 deaths, which for a small country like ours, it's quite a lot. What the government also did then was that they introduced a support package to support companies, individual entrepreneurs to recover in the amount of around 60 billion Swiss francs. That's, just to compare, that's about the state budget we have a year. So it's quite substantial. And we also introduced a phased exit strategy over the last 2 weeks. So since the end of April, we have like personal service, like hairdressers and massage salons and whatever, they can reopen with masks and everything. And from mid-May, we'll have schools reopening and public transport ramping up. And then towards June, we'll have all the non-essential shops and restaurants, so they can reopen then. But the big challenge we face is that the borders are closed. So trading goods is unlimited, but we were not allowed to travel to Germany, for example, to visit friends, for example, or to receive business colleagues. So that's a big challenge for us, because around 40% of our GDP depends on international trade, and that's not just trade in goods, but also trade in services, where it's a lot also depending on personal relationships. So we very much hope that pretty soon we can kind of remove this border controls, but there's no decision taken yet. So far, I guess the government handled it pretty well. There are certainly always things you can do differently. Parliament has now returned from lockdown as well. Just this week, they had the first extraordinary session. They confirmed a lot of laws the government introduced based on emergency law. So the support in the country is very good. People also respected the lockdown, so they stayed at home. The government tracked it with mobile phone movements and things like this. So that was pretty remarkable also for Switzerland, because, well, we haven't been involved in war or in any other situation like these for, well, more than a century. So also for me, it was kind of a really special and also very tense situation. But I think we not in terms of quantity, but in terms of types of challenges, we might have different ones than, for example, Canal, but it was just a huge struggle for Switzerland as well.
And that's a segue for Senator Gonzalez, because your plan is for the legislature to come back. And of course, you were in the midst of a pretty historic legislative session back in March, repealing the death penalty, some pretty big and important pieces of legislation that got done, and then all of a sudden everything stopped. Talk through a little bit what that's been like and how you've attempted to stay connected to your constituents during COVID-19.
Thank you. It has been so interesting for me to hear how other functional governments are working, because right now in the United States, it has been incredibly difficult because, quite frankly, nationally, there wasn't a lot of clear guidance initially. And so a lot of the onus shifted from the federal government down to the states. We were in the middle of, a really exciting progressive state legislative session where I was, working on immigration policies, criminal justice reform, abolishing the death penalty, and then, bam! In the middle of March, the first week of March, our governor, Jared Polis, declared a state of emergency. That's following Saturday, March the 14th. We took the extraordinary step of going into recess. Initially, we thought that would be for 2 weeks, and we had initially planned to return on March the 30th. And yet we realized that this pandemic was, that first we needed to follow the science and follow our public health experts and flatten the curve. And so, because Colorado is such an international tourist destination, right? Our ski slopes were hit hard, and had some of the highest concentrations of infection nationally. And so that was really important for us to institute stay-at-home orders and get flatten the curve and get things under control. We've started over the past week to slowly lift some of the most intense stay-at-home orders. We are starting to see in some counties across the state of Colorado a reopening of society. But when we do return to our legislative session to tackle what is the policy response, we've seen the public health response, but what is the policy response going to entail? we're going to be in a very different world, quite frankly. And so we are looking potentially, our state government runs on about a $30 billion annual budget, and we're looking at anywhere between $4 to $5 billion in cuts to our legislative budget that we'll have to make. And so our budget committees are in the process of sifting through what that will mean. But the economic toll that this will take on our states and our most vulnerable communities will be excruciating. And so my work is really focused on how do we, if we know that our systems were unjust prior to the pandemic, right? We had economic inequality, racial injustice. We had lots of health inequities as well. We know that crisis exacerbates inequality, and so that is going to be part of our work for when we do return to the Capitol. We have seen that the people who have been most directly impacted are our elders in nursing home facilities, are individuals who are incarcerated. Some of the highest the largest outbreaks in the state of Colorado have been in our jail and prison systems. And then also people who are working in dangerous workplaces, right? Our meat packing plants, our meat and dairy industries have been hard hit as well. And so those tend to be low wage, often immigrant and refugee workers. And so our policy response needs to take into account those inequities. We've also seen large disparities in communities of color being hard hit. And so Black and Brown communities have larger percentages of COVID infection and death in the state of Colorado, and that's also true nationally. And so we're going to have a lot of work to do in order to make sure that we don't just return to normal, because normal in the United States, normal in Colorado, did not ensure justice for everyone. And so we have to think differently and think creatively about what those solutions will mean so that everyone can enjoy health, economic well-being, and an opportunity.
So I have perhaps a tangential question. When it comes to all four of you represent constituents, in some cases clients. I'm wondering how that has changed in isolation. What has been able to stay the same, but what has changed with those relationships? Maybe we can start first with you, Senator Gonzalez.
Certainly, what has been fascinating, I would count, right when we went into lockdown, I would count the number of meetings that I was having, the number of constituents I'd see on a day-to-day basis during the legislative session, and that was easily 100 people, and to shift to doing everything from home means that I'm doing a lot of Zoom calls. It means that I'm fielding a lot of emails from my constituents, a lot of phone calls, and it's been hard. But you know what? What has kept me going is the way in which our community continues to come together. Just everyday people who are stepping up and offering to pick up prescriptions or go to the grocery store for their vulnerable neighbors. We started a phone bank across the city of Denver to reach out affirmatively to Denverites who are 65 and up. And we've made thousands volunteers, my office, other legislators' offices as well, and volunteers have made thousands of phone calls to our most vulnerable neighbors to just check in on them and say, hey, how are you? Are you doing okay? What do you need? How can we help? We our state's unemployment insurance system has been slammed. We received, I think, in 2 weeks more unemployment insurance applications than we had in the entire previous year combined. And so, you know, we had to do a lot of work in order to bolster those systems. And I was fielding lots of calls from constituents who were saying, I'm trying to navigate this system, how does it work, and what have you. And so it has shifted a lot of the way in which we do the work to a virtual space, and in the same way that it has for everyone across the globe. But what I also find really exciting is the way in which community, directly impacted community, is also coming to me with, hey, you know, here's a way that we can streamline this process to make government function more directly, particularly in light of the pandemic. The last thing I'll say is that we've heard, and I'm curious to hear from others, the tension between renters and landlords, and the threat of evictions, and how you all are navigating that, because that is a deep concern for many people here in Colorado and across the United States.
Yeah, I would love to hear that answer to that question as well. Kunal, could you maybe let us know about what's going on in India with that? I think you might still be on mute. There we go.
Yeah. So I just mentioned the level of preparedness the government of India has taken to deal with the crisis. Alongside, as my friend Alex and Mario mentioned about the lockdown. So India is one of the very few countries which has gone for national lockdown. And when you deal with a volume of population like we have with a national lockdown, it has several layers of challenges. The first, of course, is how are you going to deal with the economic impact? Second is the administrative impact, because it can actually lead to a social unrest among people, because many of our generations have never experienced anything like this. How a lockdown happens, how it feels like to stay home for so many days without knowing when this is going to end, this unpredictability factor. It can also lead to impacting your minds, your psychology and everything. So but the leadership that Mr. Narendra Modi has provided to this country, and the belief that this nation has in him, has actually led us to a situation where we have just around 1,600 deaths in a population of more than 130 billion, and the number of cases are not even 500,000. So it's like unbelievably good if you look at the parameters on which we are working. So essentially the belief that we have in our leadership, and a few very small steps alongside the stimulus package of around 1.7 lakh crores that is the government has declared for the elderly, for the farmers, for the laborers, for the women, that how they can deal with this lockdown period. Alongside that, the government has also introduced the DBT scheme, so that the leakage doesn't happen when it comes to delivering those services to the people living in rural areas. Anyone cannot take advantage of their situation. So that's one very big step that we have taken. And you imagine the level of preparedness our country had, that by the time we had 6,000 cases, we had around 1 lakh quarantine centers ready in case of any eventuality. We had enough number of ventilators ready. Even local manufacturers, big manufacturers of automobiles have got into the manufacture of like ventilators, like any other safety equipments required in such a crisis. So all around, the level of preparedness that we have executed in this crisis under the leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister is exemplary. And you see, apart from taking care of our own needs, we also could help other countries. As I mentioned about medical diplomacy, we know our economy is like that doom metal. If you ask me to describe it in genre of lyrics, it's like doom metal for us. We know we are going to have a very tough time. We know those predictions that for the next couple of years, perhaps our economy is not going to be back to the normal. Our growth rate is not going to be more than 1%, 1.5%. But we have chosen to go ahead with this idea of saving our lives and waiting for the time to save our livelihood, not at the expense of saving our livelihood. because we have tried to find a balance in between both of them. Instead of treating both of them in isolation, we have tried to get both of them lives and livelihood and go on ahead with our plan. We know, the FMCG sectors and few more sectors which are thriving in this crisis, but we also are aware of the fact that our major sectors, our media houses, our newspaper industry, our apparel sector, our aviation sector, our travel sector are suffering really bad in this situation. But still, we know that we can recover because of the belief that we have in our people, in the value system that India has. We have firm belief that we can beat this crisis of coronavirus.
And Alex, talk about representing clients. I mean, the practice of law is a fast-paced practice. Usually it's done in courthouses and corporate boardrooms. And how are you doing this now through COVID-19?
Okay, so I can speak from an in-house perspective, since I'm supporting the bank as from an in-house basis. So from an organizational angle, I think one of the early challenges for me, from my personal observation, is that how do we get the bank COVID ready? And by that we mean, how do we offer our services without compromising the health of clients or the staffs? So we explore and we have heavy discussions about ways to go really digital. So we will have to reassess all the old school ways of doing things. Having writing signatures. Now we will have to think about digital or electronic signatures, which thankfully the law in Brunei has accommodated that. And one of the positive effects that come out of this is the solution to go paperless, right? So things like sending bank statements to clients, for example, we would stop that altogether. We'll do it by way of email now, and that's really just on a holistic scale, just driving the digital agenda forward for us in the bank. So I think we from the management side as well of things, we were urged to think about the new ways of working, reassess maybe things like property costs, for example. Like, does everyone need to be in the office, considering the fact that people can work remotely from home? Those are the kind of considerations that have been put on the table for us to think about post-COVID as well.
Great. And Mario, we had a question from the audience, and you might be one of the best to answer. It has to do with the way in which COVID-19 and some of the impacts to trade and to tourism in particular are global and yet the response has been individual countries. And is there more that the world can do together, particularly around tourism and trade, since individual responses, country to country to country, doesn't necessarily address the fact that this is a global problem?
Fully agree. Maybe just one short answer to Senator Gonzalez's question about the renters and the landlord. That's actually a huge debate that's going on in Switzerland as well. This parliamentary session, unfortunately, hasn't brought any solution. There were some ideas about when, like, the landlord is willing to give away some percentage of the rent, then the state will also support the same amount, or it's just a split of 30-70%, things like this. But unfortunately, this will have to be debated in the next session, so there's no solution right now. But that's actually also a hot topic in Switzerland. John, to your question or topic, that's actually quite a critical one, I think, and especially in that field, I'm not that optimistic, because individually, as all of the speakers have told, there was some great support from the community, some bottom-up ideas. People were helping each other, neighbors were supporting each other. But internationally, it's difficult to see the same activities. In Europe, for example, the first initial reaction was that countries were introducing export restrictions on, for example, personal protective gears, ventilators, things like this. And only after a few weeks, the European Commission was able to kind of manage things like these. And we really had a hard time in Switzerland to manage supply of those goods in Switzerland. And this doesn't just apply to those goods. It's also a question for tourism or for other ideas. We see a lot of national instincts going up, and these crises definitely bring out the best and the worst in governments, but also in individuals. So it's really difficult to see for me whether on a governmental or on an international perspective we will really enter a new world where we'll have new collaboration, which is absolutely necessary to fight future pandemics or future challenges. Honestly, it's really difficult for me to paint a positive picture there. I think what's necessary is to do whatever you can bottom up. I just read an article in Foreign Policy this morning that maybe it's the time of cities to collaborate more together if nations can't do this, if WTO is failing, if there's no solution on the United Nations on sustainable development, things like these, on climate change. Maybe this is the way to do. I don't know. What I certainly know from our perspective is that business has an important role to play. It's not the problem. It should be part of the solution as well. And maybe also operationally, what we were facing with in this crisis, one thing certainly, how can we remain in touch with members of parliament, with members of the government and the administration? How do we know what's going on actually? Because, well, parliament also had kind of challenges just deciding on the agenda, and then it was difficult for us also to give input, things like these. But over the first weeks, we managed to establish a good exchange with the government as well. They were asking our input on how shall we get out of this and what's important for businesses. I work for the Foreign International Relations Department, so for us it was important to keep the borders open for trade in goods, to ensure that, well, our customs procedures are still kind of outdated. We're not very much into digitization. We're going through these procedures right now, but maybe we were pushing to speed this up a little bit. Things like these need to go on, and we really need to push for that as well. So the small steps, they can do a big difference, and maybe we shouldn't well, expect too much from the international level. While we should push for that, but don't do this without doing the other.
So I have a question for the group. Obviously, this has halted a lot of the conversations that normally would be happening right now in terms of policy, and there's all these new situations and problems that need to be solved. Maybe it's more of a personal question. Are you seeing more bipartisan agreement, or have there been any surprises for you in terms of how quickly things can move when you're under this pressure with a virus that's moving so quickly? Maybe Senator Gonzalez, do you have any examples?
Certainly. You know, one thing that I have been really heartened by is the level of intergovernmental cooperation that we're seeing. I've always enjoyed a very good relationship with my I'm in the state Senate and with my state House counterparts. But one of the things that we have been able to collaborate on in response to the pandemic is bringing together our local elected officials, our transit board, our school board, and those folks, and then so state, local, and also federal delegation to actually just provide, you know, Zoom, you know, meetings that we then transmit on social media to our constituents, and that level of cooperation and agreement. It's you know, did we have good working relationships? Sure, but were those been, I think, strengthened, and then also we've found new ways to put those relationships to good use on behalf of our constituents, right? That's something that gives me hope that we'll be able to figure out how to respond to what this new reality is going to be. I don't think that this is, I guess I'll say that from my perspective, we initially hoped that this would be a pause, right? We're going to hit the pause button and then everything's going to go back to normal. And what has unfolded is quite different, right? And this is going to shift the way that we operate as elected officials, as representatives in community for years to come. And so do I anticipate that there will be partisan wrangling? Yeah, I do. But do I also think that there will be a souring of that from our constituents, from the people that we represent? People don't want bickering and talking heads at each other. People want real solutions. And so that's something that I am hopeful about as we return to the General Assembly. What I have seen nationally, as we have seen some partisan bickering around who receives what aspect of federal relief, is that the people there's all sorts of opinion polls coming out, both here in Colorado as well as nationally, that the people reject that. That there is broad support for these stay-at-home orders. Other folks mentioned, the difference between protecting your life versus protecting your livelihood. There is that support to stay at home and protect your vulnerable neighbors, your loved ones, your family members. And so I hope that that is reflected in our politics as well.
Great, thank you. And that statement was getting nods from the three other panelists. So I'm wondering, is there anyone that wants to answer to that or speak to that? Oh, and I think you're on mute again. No.
About how we have been interacting with the masses. So being in politics or public life, it's very essential for us to be in touch with our constituents as well as people. So in a situation where you are bound to follow the physical distancing, I would not like to use the word social distancing, because if politicians and social workers start social distancing themselves, then it will be a difficult situation to deal with. So I'll term it as physical distance. So we have changed the way we have been interacting with our constituents. And in a country like India, we have started using social media much more than we were using before the COVID crisis, in order to communicate, in order to get in touch. And my party, Bharatiya Janata Party, the youth wing of our party, has introduced this nationwide hashtag of BJYM Cares, where we are helping people across the country, irrespective of their affiliation to our political ideology, political party, anything. We are getting in touch with members of other political parties and helping them out. So it's a team which is working in India. This time, there is hardly any difference. Any political difference or ideological difference has taken the backseat. What exactly is happening now in this country, that we are fighting this disease as one nation together under the leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister. And that's why, despite knowing that our economy is going to have a very tough time, we are still keeping this intact, our faith in our governments. As long as they want to extend the lockdown, we are following the guidelines. As long as they want to make us stay at home, we are ready to do that. As long as they want us to follow whatever they feel is right for the country, we are absolutely with our Prime Minister. And one thing that I guess the government of India as well as other countries should definitely look into, how this is going to impact us economically. So I guess in a country like India, personal tax cuts and a few tax benefits for the next 6 to 12 months can be a great help. And also the banking sector in a country like India needs to pass on whatever rate cuts they are receiving from the Reserve Bank of our country, so that people can feel better when it comes to getting pressurized for the borrowing that they have done from the banks. and government would also like to spend more on the infrastructural project because it's a huge crisis. Not all sectors have the enough funds to execute their projects. Majority of funding is going into the health and family welfare. So it's essential for all of us to understand the priorities, because we need to create more hospitals, we need to create more facilities to deal with this crisis, because it is not going to end in the next couple of months. It may be because the unpredictability attached to this crisis is so huge that nobody has an idea how we are going to deal with this in the near future. So it's exactly important for all of us to prepare accordingly.
Great. And as we wrap up, and Mario, I'll send this to you, and if you have something to say to start, but we like to do kind of as the conclusion of the series each time that we do it, some words of optimism, and particularly, it's obviously a very dark time for the world, but what opportunities, what kinds of things that have surprised you, or do you see coming out of this that are positive potentially? And we'll start with Mario.
Well, one thing that surprised me was how people can buy so much toilet paper in just one shopping stroll. I will never understand that. But seriously, I mean, I want to get back to my statement that this crisis brings out the worst and the best in all of us. What it brought up to me was to really think about what's really important for me. Maybe also getting the courage to tell people things you always wanted to tell, but you were never courageous enough, or you said, well, we're just meeting once a week, it doesn't matter, I want to calm things down. So kind of to clean up your backyard a little bit. That's maybe one really good advice that I would give to people. And then the other thing is, me and my wife, we're a sailing family. We have a 2-year-old. So our goal this summer would have been to go sailing the Baltic Sea for 2 months. Since we can't leave the country, it's kind of difficult to do that. But what we were used to is that, well, yes, you have to do a plan, but an awesome plan doesn't mean anything if the planning is awful. So that's one thing that also governments need to be taken accounted for. What have been done rightly? Were there any mistakes? What can we do better in the future? So this is, for a sailor, that's kind of the obvious thing. You can do a plan. I sail to point B, and suddenly the wind changes. Well, you can't stick to your old plan. You have to switch the sails. You have to maybe use the engine or do a different course, alter something. And that's something that I personally, also as a citizen, would like to see in the government once we get out of this crisis. The learnings need to be done, and we need to do things differently in the future than we did maybe before. That's all from my humble opinion.
Thank you, Mario. And if you have a 2-year-old, I know how hard it is to keep your backyard truly clean. Alex, if you could speak a little bit to some optimism from Brunei.
Hi, yeah. So generally, we are quite a peaceful country, a small country, and things like COVID is so foreign to us. Honestly, this pandemic, who would have thought? And I'm really surprised by the way, just how adaptable and how flexible we are as beings. And I think one of the positives that I try to take out from this whole situation is just to really focus on things that truly matters. Like relationships, to spend more time with your loved ones, and yeah, just to not take things for granted and just practice gratitude generally. Because the world has encountered a pandemic before, so this too will pass.
Thank you. And Kunal?
Yeah, so during this lockdown, I have reinvented myself in many ways. It's like, coronavirus is the vaccine to humans that are the virus. So it has reset us, all of us. It has reset the entire ecosystem that we live in. I started doing so many things that I never imagined I would be doing. So this has given us an opportunity to think differently, to work differently, to reinvent everything that we do. So I have particularly been doing a couple of things during this lockdown to help my constituents as well as all the people who are dealing with this crisis. There is so much of information overload related to this COVID-19 crisis. It is very important for all of us to filter that out, what is relevant and correct. So I've been advising people to help them bust those online myths and using social media to create awareness, encouraging messages of positivity to people, and requesting all of us, all my friends, to coordinate so that we can help the needy and people who are stuck in this lockdown, not finding a way to get out of it, and doing very little acts of positivity like sketching, like singing, like cooking, like gardening, like cleaning my own car so that my driver can stay at home, and gardening so that my gardener can stay at home. So they're very small activities that I guess we must have learned from this experience with COVID crisis, which is going to help us in the long run of life.
Thank you. And Senator Gonzalez, no pressure, but you want to close this out?
Certainly. You know, I try to find ways. I'm a fixer by nature, you know, it's why I was doing immigration work prior to running for office. It's why I decided to run for office, is to try to fix the systemic inequalities that so many people in our community have to navigate. And so, you know, Kunal just mentioned, you know, trying to find different ways to take care of yourself. And I think that is so important, because my fixer mentality I was very much in overload the first couple of weeks, and it was very difficult. And I was feeling a lot of anxiety of like, we should be doing more, I'm not doing enough. And, you know, one of my personal heroes, Cesar Chavez, who was a farm worker organizer, a big Chicano movement icon in the 1960s. And he has a quote that guides me often, which is, "You're never strong enough that you don't need help." And I feel like this moment has forced me to pause, to stop, to reflect, to listen, and to find different ways to experience and to train myself on patience. And so I've been baking bread. I've been doing lots of sort of small things, writing my friends letters, doing scavenger hunts with the little kids in my building, you know, and those types of small acts of social solidarity are the ways in which I think that we can continue to build community in the midst of the physical distancing that we're all experiencing. And it's participating in things like this, where I'm getting to listen to folks from different perspectives across the world and broaden my horizons, so that when it is time for us to go back to work, that we are coming at it not from a place of anxiety and stress and fear, but from a place of how do we do better.
Kunal, I saw, do you have one thing to add?
I just have a very small message for all of you who are in Denver. So I have this friend, Guru Charan Hasda, who is from my town in Jharkhand. He has opened a fabulous Indian restaurant in downtown, very close to the Hilton that you have. So you all must go there, and I'm conveying my wishes to him, and all my best wishes to him to come out of this crisis, as well as all my best wishes to all of you in Denver. You are wonderful people, and I had a very, very great time there in Denver for when we had gone there for IBLP. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time. It's just striking to see all the similarities and to see leaders leading across the globe. When we chart out just how this panel came together, it's about 6 hours apart, everybody, and yet you're all working on behalf of your clients and constituents and doing incredible work and leadership. So thank you. Just to wrap up, thank you all for joining us today, especially those who are part of the C/C Amplified Ideas Summit. I also just want to put a plug in that we have a upcoming speaker series event with Ambassador Chris Hill this Wednesday, which will be focused on the Middle East, North Korea, and other global hotspots and those kind of issues that are continuing to happen even in spite of the pandemic that maybe we're not paying as close attention to. I also want to put one more plug in, the German American Chamber of Commerce and WorldDenver are membership organizations. We only exist because our members are sticking with us and continuing to stay with us even when our mission has to change a little bit, and we really appreciate that. If you're interested in learning more, you can go to our websites, and hopefully if you're not yet members, you'll join us. But one last time, just thank you so much to this panel. I'm just in awe of the great work that you're doing all around the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, goodbye.